So what is going on, guys? And once again we are going to see something amazing, and this time is how to create a stylized beam. And I think it turned out great, and this could fit very well in a mage of some sort. We are going to see a simplified version of this, because the original one has a few more elements that could take some time to explain. I tried my best to explain you how to do it, so I hope you enjoy it. And a big shout out to my patrons for making these videos possible. If you also want to support this channel, you will get access to this project and many others as well that you can use in your games. I left a link in the description. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. So let's start with an empty game object. We can rename it to VFX_stylized beam. I'm going to reset the transform and push it a little bit up in the Y so it doesn't intersect with the ground, and then with right click in a folder I'm going to create a visual effect graph. I'm going to rename it VFX_graph_stylized beam and parent this to the empty, reset the transform just in case, and press the edit button to open VFX graph. We want to start with only one particle, so constant spawn rate can go away to give space to a single burst with 1 for the count. We don't want to output a quad, we want to use a mesh instead. By default we have the capsule, it's fine for now. We are going to replace it. Let's just increase the size with a set size and say it's 3. Oh, and it doesn't need to move, remove the velocity up here. And we can already add a set angle in case we need to rotate it. Oh, and lifetime can be constant. Turn off random. 3 seconds. In fact, this is going to be the duration of the whole effect. So in the blackboard, we can create a float property and call it duration with a value of 3 and connect it to the set lifetime. That's the initial setup for the stylized beam now within the mesh, and I'm going to use Blender version 3. We need a plane, so I'm going to select everything with A, delete it, and with Shift A add a plane. I'm going to scale it with S, lock it in the Y and insert 2 for the value. Down here I'm going to drag a new window so you can see the UV editor, because if we select these 2 points right here, they shouldn't be at the bottom, they should be on the left side. So press R, rotate 90 degrees, and make sure the left side of the UVs matches the left side of the object. And with these 2 vertices selected, we are going to press Shift S to say cursor to selected. Let's get out of edit mode by pressing Tab, and with Shift Ctrl Alt C, we are going to say cursor to 3D cursor, and this will be useful. So whenever we want to scale the stylized beam, it grows like this. And that's it, we have the mesh we need. I'm going to rename this to plane 02 because I already have one in my project. And with the plane selected, I'm going to go to File and in Export, I'm going to go to FBX, turn on Selected Objects, rename this plane 02, Export. And now in Unity, you can select the plane 02 and set the scale factor to 100. And then press Apply and assign the plane to the output particle mesh. And if we press play, maybe we don't have anything, because if we select the output particle mesh in the inspector, the cull mode should be off, so we can see both faces of this plane. Now we see something huge. And as you can see, if we rotate this, it doesn't face the camera, and we can fix it with an orient block set to fixed axis. The axis we want to fix is the Z. 0 for the X and Y and 1 for the Z. And as you can see now, it follows the camera properly and it's fixed on the Z axis. Another thing we can do is set the scale to be something like 0.4 and 2, so it gets stretched. And since we have set the pivot to be in the beginning of the mesh, now we can animate this properly with a set scale over life. The Z, it's going to be 1 always, we are not going to change. The Y, it's going to control the length. This is important. We want to select this first curve, add a key more or less around here, around 0.1, and push the first key all the way down to 0. And the X is going to control the thickness, the width. So we can select the line, add another key in the beginning, push the first key all the way down, and more or less at around 0.9, we can add another key and push the last key all the way down as well. so it shrinks towards the end of the lifetime. And we need to set the set scale block, the composition, we need to set it to multiply, otherwise it will overwrite any previous value. And if we test this out, as you can see, it grows, the length and the width as well, and then it shrinks. Nice. So at this point, we have the basis and the motion done. Now we need the artistic side of this. We need to create a texture. I'm going to use Krita. We can start by creating a new file, 2048 by 2048, completely square. It could be a rectangle as well. And the idea now is to select the brush tool, B, shortcut. Make sure it's white. And the preset brush is this one we are going to use. Opacity 100, size 600 pixels. And now the trick is to press Shift W, so we enter in wrap mode. And this allows us to create seamless textures, which is awesome. So with one stroke, I'm going to create something like this. And by pressing Shift W, you can enable and disable the wrap mode, by the way. But still in wrap mode now, we are going to use the erase tool, decrease the opacity to around 40, and decrease the size to around 200-250 pixels. And with one stroke, we are going to erase what's inside of this line, and then erase a bit here and there, in the inside, and erase as well on the outside. You can also go to the brushes and use this one. It's basically the smudge tool. Decrease the opacity to 40, and in the brush editor, you can say the fade is 0, so it's completely faded, and then you can push some parts of your texture, which is awesome. Once you have something that you like, in my case I'm going to erase a little bit more, but once you think it's finished, you can turn off wrap mode. Make sure it's centered, by the way, with Ctrl T, and then you can turn off the black background, the layer, and export this as a PNG to your Unity project, right? So once you go back to Unity, now you can select the texture and turn on Alphase Transparency and press Apply. And then assign this to the main texture of our stylized beam. And once you try it out, this is what you get. We have the motion, we have a texture. Now we can go even further, and with a shader, we can animate this, scroll and distort. I'm going to be brief, but you can watch more tutorials on my channel to learn more about shaders. So with right click, I'm going to go to shader graph and create a blank shader graph. I'm going to rename to laser shader tooth. Double click to open it up. First thing we want to do is in the graph inspector, we want to say that the target is visual effect. It's going to be unlit and we can turn on alpha clipping. We are going to need a color property, which is going to be in HDR mode, white, full opacity. And we are going to need a texture for a mask and another texture for the main texture, which is the one we created in Krita. And then a vector 2 for the main text speed. The main text, we need to sample it first. Any texture needs to be sampled. I'm going to assign the texture we created. Don't worry about being black and white here in shader graph. And then we can multiply these with the mask texture. We need to sample it as well. I'm going to select one of these masks, but I'm going to show you in a moment how to create one. The idea now is that we multiply these two together, so the beginning and the end of the laser is faded. That's important. And in the end, we want to multiply these with the color. And then connect to the base color of the fragment function. And let's go ahead and take care of the scroll of the main texture with a tiling and offset node. The offset, we can connect this to the UV. The offset, as you can see, enables us to scroll this. And since we need to animate this, we need a time node. Multiply it with the main text speed, the vector 2 we created earlier. You can connect it to the offset and if you increase the main text speed, the X, to 1, as you can see, it's scrolling. This is a nice first draft. Let's save this shader and go back to VFX graph. And now we have this input right here. If you don't see it, make sure you go to Preference in Edit, and in Visual Effects you turn on Experimental Operator /blocks. Now we can assign the shader we created, and oh yeah, this is normal because we need to take care of the alpha, of the transparency. So back to the shader, before multiplying with color, we want to split this multiply and the A is the alpha. We want to connect it to the alpha input of the fragment. Oh, let's already create a float for the alpha clip. This one is going to be a slider between 0 and 1. It will allow us to dissolve the texture. Let's save this. And now in VFX Graph, besides scrolling the opposite direction. Okay, so let's see how to create a mask. First, let's just change the blend mode to additive. So back to Krita, we can create a new file. 512 by 512 is enough. And the idea is to use the gradient tool, this one. And up here, we want to select the second slot, the one that says foreground to transparent. We want to press the edit button. In my case, it's already done, but basically the first key, it's going to be with no opacity. The second key is at 100 opacity. Third key is around 60 of opacity. And the last key is at 0 opacity. You can press OK and now go up here. You need to make this straight. So we are going to go from corner to corner. Press Alt, drag and release. And here we go. We have a gradient. And we are going to export two versions. One with the black background. Export it as a PNG. And the other without the black background. Exactly like this. One is to work with alpha mode and the other to work with additive blend mode. If you want to learn more about this, make sure to check out my channels and the courses I have on Udemy. They will certainly help you a lot to understand shaders and a lot of things as well. Okay, so once we go back to Unity, we can assign the mask we created. I'm going to assign the one with a black background. And as you can see, it fades the beginning and the end, which is awesome. I'm going to make it scroll faster, -2, and select an orange, bright orange. Increase the intensity to 3. Looks good. Let's just make one final change to the shader. A distortion effect will look great on this. So back here, let's add a lerp node. As you can see, the T value will blend between A and B, in this case between dark and white, which means for the A option, we want to use the UV node. It represents no distortion. And for the second option, the B, we want a completely distorted effect. And we can do it with a simple noise. We can set the scale to 30 for now and connect it to the B. We are also going to need to scroll this, so once again we are going to need a tiling and offset node, and then a time and multiplier node, and a vector too. In this case we can call it the distortion speed. Connect this to the offset and the tiling and offset to the UV of the simple noise. And for the T option we can create a float and call it the distortion amount, which is going to be between 0 and 1. We can connect it to the T input of the lerp, and one last float that we can add is a distortion scale. Connect it to the simple noise, default value of 30 by the way. And we can connect this linear interpolation node to the UV of the tiling and offset. And you may not necessarily see the change right now, because we need to increase the distortion amount. But once you do it, you can clearly see that we are animating the stylized trail. Great, so now let's set the distortion speed to -3, which is faster than the main text speed, and it will give a really nice sensation, a really nice distortion on the stylized beam. We can add a few more elements. For example, we can copy this, Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V. This is going to be for the electric beam. And with the elements that we already have, it's very simple. For example, we can switch the color to a blue and then increase the alpha clip, which will erode the texture, and then increase the distortion amount to 0.2, 0.3. That should give a really nice feeling, and my values may not fit your texture, so it's really up to you to test and see what will look better. Alright, so as you can see, it was super easy to create an electric feeling. One of the final elements that we can add to the beam is a dark background, so we can copy now the beam core with Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V again, and this one is going to be for the beam dark. And the main difference here is that the blend mode is going to be in alpha, so we can render darker colors, and the color is going to be a dark red, really dark. And then we can increase the set scale to something like 0.6 for example. And we have two problems right now. First one is that we see the black of the mask in the extremities. It's easily fixed by switching our mask with the transparent one that we exported earlier in Krita. And the second problem is that it's being rendered in front of everything, and we actually don't want that. If we select our VFX graph in the inspector, we can push the beam dark all the way to the beginning. So it's the first one being rendered, and then everything else will be rendered on top. What I'm going to do now is decrease the beam core wide as well as the electric beam to 0.4. You see, it's an adjustment of values to balance everything nicely, so they have a good proportion between each other, and that comes up with a little bit of trial and error. Now, since all of this is the same up here, we can connect all of these output particles to one of these update particles, like this. Great. One of the last things that I can show you is how to add stretched particles to this. We want to go ahead and start with a simple particle system. You can press spacebar and search for one. And the first thing we can do is set the duration of this particle system. So if we select the spawn in the inspector, we can say the loop count is going to be constant as well as the loop duration. And for the duration, I'm gonna pick this variable and subtract a very small percentage of the original value. And we can set the constant spawn rate to 40. It is advised to also increase the capacity. But what really matters for these stretched particles is to say the velocity of the z-axis is going to be between 20 and 40, for example, and the rest is going to be between 0.5 and minus 0.5. Something short for the lifetime, 0.2, 0.45, and then we can say they spawn in a circular shape. So let's use a set position, arc circle, and decrease the radius to 0.5. That should be enough. Let's take care of the aspect down here and set the blend mode to additive, and the main text to the default particle that comes with Unity. It's quite useful. And then you want this to be a long velocity. We don't see any changes because I've turned off auto. I will compile it in a moment. Let's just say we want a set size random between 0.7 and 1.2. Now I'm going to compile, and yeah, we need to stretch them. We already have the long velocity orient block. Now we simply need to use a set scale. We can say it's 0.05 for the X and 1 for the Y. Oh, and for the set size over life, we need to change the composition to multiply and use this curve from big to small. To add color, we can use a set color, an orange with brightness of 3, and then disable the set color over life. We already have the size over life that is shrinking the particles, we don't need to fade them. And if we compile this, as you can see, we get a really nice set of particles, of sparks flying at high velocity along the beam, and that adds a nice touch of motion. Looking very good, very interesting. One last thing we can quickly see is how to add a flash in the beginning. Once again, with a simple particle system, you can say the main text is default particle, blend mode to additive so it becomes bright, and turn on use soft particle so it becomes soft whenever it touches some geometry. Set size random between 2.5 and 5, and then use this curve from big to small again, and set the composition to multiply. We don't need velocity, we just need this to have a super short lifetime like 0.1 and 0.2, increase the capacity, and in the spawn say the loop duration and loop count is constant, so we can connect this duration variable up here, and we can add color, of course. An orange, a bright orange. Set the color over life to multiply. And here we go. We have some flashes at the beginning of our laser beam, which really adds a nice touch. Obviously from now on you can add more elements on top of what we already have. I think this is a good basis for you to develop from here. I obviously went a few extra steps and spent a few more hours to reach to this point. All of these laser beams are available on my Patreon page, and you will obviously get access to many more assets that you can use. I wanna take this moment to thank each patron for supporting the channel, and as usual a quick shout out goes to the top tier patrons, which are Adrian Biedrzycki, Elak Frost, Albert Wagner, Austin Schneider, Krubidubidu, Derek Benson, Donald Thompson, Edward Chai, Eric Hudson, Goblin Plague, Guilherme Trindade, Joe's Game Show, Johan Estrom, John Nix, KC Myler, Leonardo Ferraz, Levin W, Little Tsai, Lovestaposi, Maxim, Mograph Tech, Natsims, Oitsk, Radioactive Bullfrog, Revenant Games, Chow, Sharat Ravishankar, Sungyup Joe, Verisuta, Vlad Yakubiski, and William Morris. Your support is super much appreciated, guys, and to anyone who watched this, I hope you have enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks, bye.